Orot pre-Pesach Shir, calling it Making Pesach Real, in the sense of exploring together what's the real experience that the Seder Pesach is designed to help facilitate, is trying to help us access. What's the experience, what's the state of mind that the Seder is designed to bring us to? That's going to be the aim of our shir. And in this direction we've sent out sources, and I'll have these sources here. And one of the perhaps fundamental statements in the Haggadah, in the experience of the Seder, comes towards the end of the Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, the story of the going out of Egypt, where the Haggadah says, B'chol dor vador chayev adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In each and every generation, a person is obligated to see himself as if he went out from Egypt, as it says, and you shall tell your child on that day, saying, because of this that Hashem did for me when I went out from Egypt. The verse here, what Hashem did for me, and every one of us says, what Hashem did for me when I went out from Egypt, implies that we are experiencing this going out of Egypt in some sense. Now it does say a person is obligated to see himself as if he went out from Egypt. So we're experiencing it, and yet understanding that each of us personally perhaps did not go out from Egypt, but on this night, the Seder night, all together, we're looking to have an experience of that going out from Egypt. The Rambam interprets this, his own girsa, his own version of this statement from the Haggadah, and he adds emphasis in a very interesting way. He says, in each and every generation, a person is obligated to show himself as if he himself went out now from the slavery of Egypt. As it says, and it is us who he brought out from there, brought forth from there. Slightly different, it's kind of a paraphrase, really, of the Haggadah, and a different verse, even. He's emphasizing, first of all, to show ourselves, not just to see oneself, as if that's kind of an abstract way of, interpreting ourselves, but demonstratively to show ourselves, in a certain sense, almost to act ourselves, I say act out, act ourselves, as if we ourselves now, at the Seder Pesach, are going out of Egypt. And he brings the verse that really does say that. It emphasizes it is us, that Otanu hotzi misham. It is us. We are saying that God brought out. That every one of us says that God brought out of Egypt. And he brings the verse, and you remember that you were a slave. That is to say, as if you yourself were a slave, and you went out to freedom and were redeemed. So the Rambam really emphasizes the experiential dimension of the Seder. We're acting out, but not even just play acting. We're really acting, and as if, but really inhabiting the role, method acting, you want to call it that. We are inhabiting the experience of going out of Egypt at the Seder. So let's see how this is done, and what the essential basis for this is in the Haggadah and in the halachot of Pesach itself, and then what is the experience that we're being guided towards. So also towards the end of the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, we have this statement from Rabbi Gamliel. After all the talk, all of our discussion, all of immersing ourselves in the story of the going out of Egypt, and that is the mitzvah of one of the mitzvot of the night, that along with eating matzah with maror, telling the story of the going out of Egypt is a mitzvah. Okay? And Rabbi Gamliel says, famously, in the Mishnah in Pesachim, Gemara Pesachim, Rabbi Gamliel used to say, whoever does not say these three things has not fulfilled their obligation. And these are Pesach, Matzah, and Moror. And when he says, say these things, well, let's see what he means. Pesach, by reason that, in other words, what's the reason for, in the time of the Mikdash, eating the Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering? By reason that Hamakom, God, the omnipresent, jumped over the houses of our forefathers. Pesach is to jump. In the sense of spared the houses of our forefathers, jumped over the houses of our forefathers in Egypt, as it says, and you shall say, it is a Pesach sacrifice to Hashem, who jumped over the houses of the children of Egypt when he struck Egypt, and he saved our houses. So it's, in a sense, instead of Pesach, the jumping holiday, jumping in the sense of God protecting us, God not acting against us, but God saving us. So we give the reason for, in the time of the Mikdash, of the temple, eating the Korban Pesach, the Pesach offering. Matzah. What's the reason? We should explore the reason for eating matzah, says Rabbi Gamliel. By reason that our forefathers were redeemed from Egypt, as it says, and they baked the dough they brought forth from Egypt into matzah cakes, for it had not leavened, for they were driven out from Egypt and could not tarry, nor had they prepared provisions for themselves. So we eat matzah, this most basic bread, most basic food, as basically a sign of the haste by which we left Egypt, which is also the haste by which God saved us from Egypt. Okay? So the matzah becomes this symbol of geula, this symbol of redemption itself. Okay? And then the moror. What's the reason for the moror? That the Egyptians embittered the lives of our forefathers in Egypt, as it says, and they embittered their lives with hard work at the beginning of Parshat Shemot. So Rabbi Gamliel says, with all of the talk of the Seder, and all the ways in which we immerse ourselves in the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the story of the going out of Egypt, it's essential that we interpret the reason, to understand the reasons for the three eating mitzvot of Pesach, eating the Korban Pesach in the time of the Mikdash, the Pesach offering, eating matzah, eating maror. If we don't understand the reasons for this, and not just understand it, whoever does not say these three things has not fulfilled their obligation. Well, which obligation? Which mitzvah is not being fulfilled here? And that'll be our first question to wrestle with. Tosfot, on that passage in the Gemara, says, and focuses on, you shall say. And you shall say, it is a Pesach sacrifice. That's the proof text, that it shows that there's something to say here, says Tosafot. It's, you shall say it is a Pesach sacrifice, meaning in speech, that it is necessary to say this Pesach sacrifice that we are eating is because of this. And the matzah and the maror are connected to the Pesach sacrifice, so it's also necessary to say this matzah that we are eating is because of this. And this maror that we are eating is because of this. So it seems that what Tosfot is saying, that you have the mitzvah on the night of the Seder, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, telling the story of the going out of Egypt. That's the Haggadah. And then you have, along with the actions of eating Pesach, matzah, and moror, you have something to say. You have to say the reasons for doing this. And is this part of the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the story that we're telling of the going out of Egypt? Or is this part of the mitzvah itself, the mitzvot themselves, of eating Pesach, matzah, moror? What kind of speaking is this? Okay. Now, Pesach, the Tosfot implies that eating the Pesach, matzah, and moror, these mitzvot of eating are accompanied by the statement of the reasons for doing it. And it seems to be separate from the issue of telling the story of the going out of Egypt. That seems to be what Tosfot is implying. The Rambam, Maimonides, says it a different way and interprets what Rabbi Gamliel is telling us in a slightly different way. Whoever does not say these three things, Pesach, Matzah, Moror, on the night of the 15th, Nisan, does not fulfill their obligation, and these are statements that are all called Haggadah. Haggadah, the telling, which is this telling of the story of the going out of Egypt. That's the mitzvah, the specific mitzvah that we have, along with eating the special foods, symbolic foods of Pesach. It's about to tell the story of the going out of Egypt. And so the Rambam is saying that Rabbi Gamliel's point is that speaking about these three mitzvot of eating is part of the story of the going out of Egypt. In other words, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the telling the story. It's not, as Tosfot seems to imply, that we, along with eating, we also announce, why am I eating Pesach? Why am I eating matzah? Why am I eating moror? It's Tosfot. Rambam says, no, this is part of the general story that we're telling throughout the Haggadah of the going out of Egypt. Okay. Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, in his Binyan Sion, Shalit Shubo, comes in support of the Rambam's approach and expands it a bit. So he asks the question, when Rabbi Gamliel says that it's necessary to explain the reasons for Pesach, Matzah, and more that we're eating, what? If he didn't, he's saying, does that mean if we did not fulfill the mitzvah of speaking, they're saying this is what Pesach means, this is what matzah means, this is what moror means, but we did eat Pesach and matzah and moror, would we not be fulfilling the eating of Pesach, matzah, and moror? If you ate it, you ate it. And there's the specific mitzvah to eat these symbolic items. If you ate them, you ate them. So what? If you didn't speak about them, did you not fulfill the actual maaseh mitzvah, the action mitzvah of eating? You did. So Rabbi Ettlinger says, here the eating is a separate mitzvah and the speaking is a separate mitzvah. It's not relevant to say that he would not fulfill the mitzvah of eating since he did not fulfill the mitzvah of speaking about it. So Ettlinger now tries to explain what Rabbi Gamliel is about. He says that the fact that a person, when Rabbi Gamliel says that a person does not fulfill her obligation, it's not said regarding eating Pesach, Matzah, and Moror, but regarding the mitzvah of the telling the story of the going out of Egypt. So Rabbi Gamliel came to explain two things. First, that regarding the mitzvah of telling the story, there's a minimum. There's a minimum way to fulfill this mitzvah, even without all of the rest of the story that we tell from the beginning of the Haggadah to this point in the Seder. The minimum is to explain the reasons for Pesach, Matzah, and Moror that we eat. And there's a second point, he says, to understand from the words of Rabbi Gamliel, even if one spoke all night about the Exodus from Egypt, went into great depth and then really expanded the part, the more you speak about it, the more praiseworthy it is, says the Haggadah. But if you did not explain these reasons, one still does not fulfill the obligation of telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Okay, so that's Rav Ettlinger's approach in Sion. His point is that what Ben Gamliel is talking about is you're not fulfilling the full or the essential mitzvah of the telling of the story, Sipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, the going out of Egypt. Now, Tosfot seemed to imply that the telling of these reasons for eating were part of the eating mitzvah itself, not part of the story. The Ramban, Nachmanides, Ramban in Melchemet Hashem, his commentary on Brachot, is even more explicit about this. He says, whoever does not say these three things, Pesach, Matzah, Mor, has not fulfilled their obligation, but not such that one needs to go back and eat the Pesach, Matzah, and Mor. His point here, it's subtle, but when you get it, it's explicit. The Ramban is saying, actually, similar to what Tosfot implies, that this requirement to speak of the reasons, Rabbi Gamliel is talking about, this requirement is part of the mitzvot themselves of eating Pesach, Matzah, Mor. But when Rabbi Gamliel says you're not fulfilling your obligation, it's not to the extent that if you forgot to talk about the reasons for these three eating mitzvot, and you come to the end of the Seder and say, oh, I forgot to talk about it, you don't have to go back and eat Pesach, Matzah, and Mor. It's not that you don't fulfill the obligation to that extent, but you didn't fulfill it in the best way. But the point is that the Ramban here seems to, actually is telling us that this requirement to speak of the reasons for Pesach, Matzah, and Mor are part of the mitzvot of Pesach, Matzah, and Mor, and not of the separate mitzvah of telling the story of going out of Egypt. Rav Soloveitchik, Zatzal, my Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, in one of the shirim that is recorded in Hararei Kedem, a great collection of Rav Soloveitchik's shirim, particularly on the Moadim, on the festivals. Rav Soloveitchik has Kedarko, as his way, brilliant insight into what the Ramban is saying, what Tosfot is saying, what Rabbi Gamliel is saying. So he says like this. He says, implied by the words of the Ramban, Nachmanides, that these three things are part of the mitzvot, Pesach, Matzah, and Mor, not part of the mitzvah of telling the story of the going out of Egypt. So, it's a very subtle reading, but it's insightful, as was always his way. Thus, Nachmanides writes, if it were taken literally that one would not fulfill one's obligations, one would have to go back and eat Pesach, Matzah, and Mor. But the Ramban's approach is, in truth, it's not an indispensable condition, li'ikuva, but rather one did not fulfill one's obligation to do the mitzvah in its ideal form. Okay? That's what the Ramban is saying. But it is part of the eating mitzvot, the action, eating mitzvot. So, what's the theory behind this? And here the Rav approaches this in the typical Brisker analytic approach, of the Brisker school of interpretation. So he says, one could explain, regarding eating of Pesach, Matzah, and Mor, those eating action mitzvot, there are two separate fulfillments. One fulfillment of the mitzvah, one aspect of the fulfillment is eating. As the verses say, the Pesach offering, one fulfills the mitzvah of, and you shall eat the meat on this night. Brings a verse. For matzah, there's the mitzvah, in the evening you shall eat matzot, the action of eating. And for the maror, the mitzvah on matzot u'maror, you shall eat the Pesach offering, which tells us that we eat maror. Okay, so there are the specific mitzvah of the physical action mitzvah of eating. Whoever, besides this, we learn from the verse, and you shall say it is a Pesach offering. V'amata zevach Pesach, because that's a verse also. You shall say it is a Pesach offering, which really says you have the Pesach offering in front of you, and you say this is a Pesach offering. that with the eating of Pesach, matzah, and moror, the Pesach offering and matzah and moror, there's an additional fulfillment of telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And what he means by that is, this is not part of the separate mitzvah of the telling the story, but this is an aspect of the eating itself, which the telling informs, what the telling of the story informs. That this telling of the story raises up the action of eating itself, but it's part of the mitzvah of eating. And that's what Rabban Gamliel is telling us, according to the Ramban. You don't really fulfill the mitzvah of eating these symbolic foods in their best way, unless you talk about, at the Seder, what they mean. Do it before you actually do it, but talk about what they mean. So, and it says, which now would turn this on the other side, this means that the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the telling of the story of the Exodus from Egypt, itself has two aspects, or two ways of doing it. One, by saying the Haggadah and the story and all of the interpretations of the Midrashim. Okay, that's one way. And a second way, by the action of the mitzvah of telling the story, which is done when eating Pesach, Matzah, and Moror, just before we actually eat Pesach, Matzah, and Moror, as part of their mitzvot. And the Rabbi gives a backup to this. In other words, what's the notion? In other words, that he's saying there's a mitzvah of telling the story, and then there's what we call a ma'aseh mitzvah, and ma'aseh mitzvot, action mitzvot, eating the three symbolic foods. Okay? And those eating the three symbolic foods themselves are an aspect of the experience of understand the experience of that eating those foods is designed to get us to. And so here the Rav quotes the passage from Maimonides that we saw before. The Rambam says, in each and every generation a person is obligated to show himself, not just to see himself, to show himself actively, to, like method acting, really inhabit the role, be the role, to show himself as if he himself went out now from slavery of Egypt. As it says, and it is us who he brought forth from there. And that verse really brings it home. It's not just that God brought us out, meaning us, generally speaking, the children of Israel in the collective. He brought us, really, you and me, out from there. That's what we need to understand and to say. So he says, when he gives an example that we have other ways of demonstrating, of demonstratively acting this this awareness, to eat and drink while reclining, seba, to drink the 4 cups of wine, everyone, men and women, adults. It's clear that this is in order to show oneself as if, there's still an as if here, to show oneself as if he himself, she herself, came forth now from Egyptian enslavement. So the way the Rav conceptualizes this, behold, this is the obligation of telling the story in Haggadah by way of action. So you have it by way of speech, of telling strictly in speech, in terms of as we go through most of the Haggadah. But when we get to the eating action mitzvot, this telling is part of the eating action mitzvot. So he says, similarly, Nachmanides, Ramban mixes into the mitzvah of eating Pesach, Matzah, and Moror the obligation of telling the story as part of those mitzvot. We don't do it, we don't fulfill them in the full way that we should fulfill those action mitzvot of eating. Okay. Come this far. The question now is, why do these mitzvot, Pesach, Matzah, and Moror, require us really to speak their reasons? And this is actually, the backdrop of this is that there is a notion, there's a principle. It's a dispute in halakha, but it's the general consensus is that most mitzvot do not require kavanah to fulfill them. And particularly eating mitzvot, which just by doing it, you're eating, you're at least registering the fact that you're physically eating. So you don't need a special kavanah, special intent, and awareness, and dedicating this action to its spiritual meaning. Just eat. But by Pesach, Matzah, and Moror, we do have this requirement to have kavanah and to express that kavanah, that intent, to eat, and what this eating means. So, here the Maharsha of Shmuel Edel's, in his commentary on the Agadot, in this passage in Pesachim, has profound insight into what's going on here. So he says, whoever does not say these three things on Pesach does not fulfill his obligation. Pesach, Matzah, Moror, quoting Rabbi Gamliel. And he says, we do not find for other mitzvot that it's required to say for them for what reason we do them. And it's actually a unique kavanah itself. Not just kavanah to do the action, but kavanah, intent to understand for what reason we're doing this action. We do not find this for other mitzvot. What is going on here with these mitzvot of Pesach that we require this kind of kavanah to understand the reason for what we're doing? Usually for most mitzvot, it's enough to say the blessing for the mitzvah. And that blessing is already a sense that we are conscious and aware of what we're doing. Since the reason, though, that Pesach, Matzah, Moror require explicitly to understand and to express the reason why we're doing it, he says this is made explicit at the beginning. This is a very scholarly insight here. The first chapter of the Gemara Zevachim. There the Gemara says, all the sacrifices that were sacrificed not in their own name are kosher, except for the Pesach offering and the Zevach Pesach and the sin offering, the Chatat. Right from the beginning of the Gemara Zvachim. What does it mean? That all sacrifices that were sacrificed not in their own name are kosher. So the general point is, if you were giving one kind of a sacrifice, say for an asham or something like that, for a guilt offering, but you got a little mixed up, and it ended up that you understood that it was for a shlamim offering, which is an offering that's given, in which not only kohanim but the person giving the offering takes part of. Now, so you offered an animal, and yet it's not. You offered it in the wrong category. Okay, the same species of animal, but offered in the wrong category. Nonetheless, your offering is still sacred. It doesn't accomplish what you wanted it to accomplish, but it's still sacred, and it still gets offered in the mikdash, except for the Pesach offering and the sin offering. If you offer the Pesach offering for the wrong reason, you thought, instead of the Korban Pesach, you're offering this as a chagiga, which is another offering that's given on the night of Pesach, the Pesach offering doesn't count. It's disqualified. So too for a chatat, a sin offering. These two are disqualified if not offered in their own naming. For you know what you're trying to offer, and you're offering it for that exact korban. So the Maharsha says here that the reason is explained there is because these korbanot, these sacrifices, the Pesach offering and the chatat, the sin offering, are offered because of a blemish, because of a problem. Because the person that is offering them has been distanced from holiness, and therefore these offerings, for the sake of the person that's offering them, require greater closeness to holiness. That is to say, they have to be sacrificed, offered in their own name as what they are, no mistakes. Well, when it comes to the chatat offering, so it's a sin offering, a person that has committed a sin unintentionally, but it's a sin. they have to know what they're offering and offering the very korban, the very sacrifice that they're offering, because they're coming from a state of sin, and in order to bring them, return them, or to even advance them to a state of holiness, they need to know that this, what they are really doing. They have to be serious about it. That this korban, therefore, has to be offered for its own reason, for the sake of bringing the person closer to holiness, closer to Hashem. That makes sense for a chatat. There's a problem here. It's offered as a kapara, a cleansing for a problem. But what about the Pesach offering? What's the problem? Why is it that when we offer a Pesach offering in the time of the Mikdash, the implication is we're far from holiness, and this Pesach offering is to get us closer to holiness, closer to Hashem. Why? How are we far from holiness? So he says, Rabbi Gamliel says, the Marsha continues, also the eating of the Pesach offering by the owners, by those who are offering it, should be explicitly in its own name to come closer to holiness. And this is what it says, Pesach, for what reason? In a Pesach offering. That the Holy One, blessed be He, jumped over our houses. What was the blemish here? How are we far from holiness? Explains. For Israel in Egypt had been under the rule of the klipot shel tuma, the shells of impurity, to serve idolatry there in Egypt. As it says, and this is a devastating set of verses from Yechezkel Hanavi, Ezekiel. Quote, let every person cast away the abomination of his eyes. Do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am Hashem your God. This is the verse. But, that's what God said in the Midrashim. It's Aaron that conveys this to Bnei Yisrael when they were in Egypt. But they, Am Yisrael, rebelled against me, says Yechezkel, rebelled against God, is saying this, through Yechezkel. But they, in Egypt, Israelites, rebelled against me and would not listen to me. They did not cast away the abomination of their eyes, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. When was that? We look at the commentators, Rashi and all the commentators. In fact, according to the Midrash that Rashi brings, most of the Israelites in Egypt succumbed to idolatry. Pretty devastating. There are Midrashim that say otherwise, but this Yechezkel, most of the Jews, in fact, succumbed to idolatry. Only 1/5, Chamushim, that's right, 1/5 of the Jews really escaped, of the Israelites escaped Egypt in the Exodus. Most of them did not cast away the abominations, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. So we who are experiencing on this night of Pesach at the Seder, we are each of us experiencing the core of Am Yisrael ourselves. We start far from holiness. But those of us in Egypt at that time, with the sacrifice of the Pesach and eating of sheep at that time in Egypt, the sheep were the abomination of Egypt. Apparently, they worshipped that, the sheep. They came close to the Shekhinah. So they bring it from the verse, and you shall say it is a Pesach sacrifice, meaning the eating of the Pesach sacrifice, for the sacrifice was already explicitly in its own name. It says Pesach sacrifice to Hashem. That eating itself, is a bringing us closer in holiness to Hashem. Now, it's the eating. What Moshe means here is that the sacrifice, the act of slaughtering and offering the Pesach sacrifice, is the beginning of this process of coming close to Hashem, up to holiness, bringing close to holiness, to the Shekhinah, but not just the offering of the sacrifice, but the very eating of it brings us closer to Hashem. Brings us into Kedusha, into holiness. And that's why it needs to be brought in its own name. Meaning, we really have to understand we are bringing this Korban Pesach, this Pesach sacrifice, because we are inhabiting the experience of all Jews of all time, and the Jews of the time of Egypt were far from Hashem. And in fulfilling the Pesach sacrifice, in eating it, that momentous night of Pesach, they were brought closer to holiness. Also by Moror, it's necessary to say for what reason we eat Moror. Because the difficult Egyptian enslavement this put us under the rule of impurity. So we need to mention vocally, say you should remember you were a slave and Hashem redeemed you. We were in a distanced place from Hashem. We were enslaved. We were kept from a sense of holiness by that condition. But Hashem redeemed us, freed us completely from that condition, and in that sense brought us to holiness. To holiness. That is, you express by mouth that this is a Marshah, that God distanced you from impurity to bring you close to the Shekhinah. And so too for matzah. As it says, 7 days you shall eat matzah. In order that you remember the day of your going out, that you remember that God distanced us from impurity, which is symbolized in the power of the leaven of the dough, the chametz of the dough, to bring you close to holiness by eating matzah. And he gives an example like a Kohen eating the meal offering, which was also of matzah. It was not chametz. To come close in holiness. So the Maharsha says what Rabbi Gamliel is getting across here, why we need to say these three reasons for each of these mitzvot, to really understand why we are doing these mitzvot, is because the purpose of these mitzvot and our understanding of these mitzvot is to bring us to a state of Kedusha. That's what really the whole Seder Pesach, the night of Pesach, and all its mitzvot are guiding us towards the state of Kedusha, of holiness. What is that state? Holiness is not just a status in an abstract sense, being sacred, holy, kodesh. Holiness is an experience. What's the consciousness of holiness? What is the experience of holiness? And for this, we turn to the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, great Mekubal, Kabbalist. And you see in poskim, in the Forshim, the commentators, various definitions of holiness, of Kedusha. But it's the Ramchal who really gives us the full sense of what is the human experience of Kedusha, of holiness. He says, the matter of Kedusha, holiness is double. First of all, its beginning is in avodah, in service, and its end is in gemul, in reward. Its beginning is in effort, hishtadlut, and its end is gift, matana. And what he means by this is a person, when working towards Kedusha, sanctifies himself, herself, works at that as best we can. And then, at the end of the process, they, meaning heaven, sanctifies us. As the sages say, a person sanctifies himself a little, they, meaning heaven, sanctify him a lot. He sanctifies himself below, they sanctify him from above. So, the Ramchal explains, it's very difficult for us to be to really bootstrap ourselves to a state of Kedusha, of holiness. We are basar v'dam, flesh and blood. So the process is we try the best we can, do the best we can, to understand the preciousness of this life that we've been given, to understand the preciousness of this world that we live in, to understand the preciousness of reality, to understand what the angels are saying when they say, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvakot, Lo Chol Haaretz Kavodo. Holy, holy, holy is Hashem. Filling all the world is His glory. To understand how this reality shines, how precious this reality is that we are in, that explodes from Hashem, that flows from Hashem. If we understood this, there would be no violence in this world. There would be no evil in this world. It would be not possible to harm another person in this world. We would be celebrating this world at every moment. Celebrating this reality, which is extraordinary gift, wow, at every moment. That's Kedusha. That's the experience of holiness. So the Ramchal says, the person who is sanctified with the holiness of his Creator, even his physical actions become real matters of holiness. And he says this is the difference between a person who is who's trying for tahara, for purity in his life, and a person who is going for holiness in his life. The pure person, tahur, his physical actions are only done as necessary. He himself does not intend to do them except as necessary, so that he would escape the evil of physicality and remain pure. But, says the Ramchal, to be comprised in holiness, this person does not attain that. Purity is a lesser level than holiness. A holy person adheres constantly in God. His soul, and this is nefesh, and the Ramchal is a Mekubal, he's talking technically, not only our neshama, our highest level, and our ruach, which is our emotional, spiritual level, but our nefesh, the animating spirit of life in the body. Such a person who is in Kedusha, his nefesh goes among the true intelligibles, the deepest principles of reality, in love of his Creator, in reverence for Him. He's considered as if he goes about before Hashem, Artzos HaChaim, in the lands of life, which means in a Gan Eden existence, a Garden of Eden existence, and even higher, in an Olam Haba existence, in a world to come existence, even here in this world. This is based on the Ramban's definition of Dveikut. Dveikut is such awareness of God that you are living the life of the world to come in this physical world. You are certainly living the life of Gan Eden in this physical world, and even beyond that, in this world, in the body. And that is the goal of Torah. That consciousness, that awareness, is the goal of Torah. That we are living our lives in the pure in the holy conscious presence of Hashem, walking before Hashem, going about before Hashem, in a state of awareness of the kedusha of this reality, the holiness of this reality. From Hashem's holiness, the holiness of the world, our own holiness. Behold, such a person himself is considered like a mishkan, like the temple, like an altar, as the sages say. May their memory be a blessing, the sages. And God ascended from Avraham, meaning Avraham was like as if the holy chariot, the Merkavah of Yechezkel for Hashem. The patriarchs themselves are the chariot, it says, and Rashi extends this, that the righteous, tzaddikim themselves are the Merkavah of Hashem. The vehicle, the Merkavah, the vehicle for Hashem in this world. Every one of us becomes a vehicle for God in this world. The Shekhinah dwells upon them as she dwells upon the temple. You heard those sounds. This means that a missile is on its way towards Israel right now, and we have to go into our miklat. But we're right at the end of the time is okay. We're right at the end of this year. This is the point. So that a person in a state of holiness, this person is in this state of holiness, it's you living your life in the lands of the living. We are in this consciousness that everything around us, about us, within us, is within the holiness of Hashem. And this is the consciousness that the Seder Pesach is designed to get us towards. This is making it real. This is the harot atzmo, to show yourself that you are to enact being in this consciousness of holiness. Yehi Ratzon, may we all merit to experience in this Pesach, in this momentous time, this extraordinary historical passage for Am Yisrael. May we experience the kedusha of this world, the precious holiness of this world, the precious holiness of each other, to live our lives in Eretz HaChaim, in the land of life, to bring this sense of life and beauty and preciousness of kedusha, bring it into this world that needs it so much. Kein Yiritzon. May we all experience this highest consciousness of Pesach.